Can a civilization survive after it abandons the philosophy that created it? Rome tried to answer that question by accident, in real time, in the 4th century, and one emperor spent his entire short reign arguing the answer was no. His name was Julian. History remembers him as the Apostate. He would have told you he was the one staying loyal. His central claim was specific. Hellenism, for Julian, wasn't a religion sitting next to Greek philosophy. It was the same thing, one complete way of life, where the gods, the myths, the ethics, and the logic were never separated into different boxes the way they are now. And in his work against the Galileans, he makes a direct accusation. Christianity had taken Greek philosophy's tools, its logic, its moral vocabulary, its picture of a rational, ordered universe, and kept all of it, while rejecting the actual foundation those tools were built on. You can borrow the roof, he was arguing. You cannot keep it standing once you've knocked out the walls. That's the claim. Here's what he thought was actually holding the walls up. Julian believed the universe was ordered, not accidental, and he had a specific structure in mind for how that order worked. At the very top, something called the One, not a god exactly. Beyond even existence itself, the source everything else flows from. Below that, the demiurge, an ordering intellect that takes raw, formless possibility and shapes it into an actual, structured cosmos. And in his hymn to King Helios, Julian makes the case that the physical sun, the one actually in the sky, is the visible image of that intelligible order. Not a metaphor he's using loosely, an argument. The sun makes ordinary sight possible, the same way, structurally, that the good makes understanding possible. Everything in his cosmos sits in a hierarchy, one level giving rise to the next, all the way down to the physical world you're standing in. Is the universe run by intelligence or by chance? That's the actual question underneath the hymn, and Julian's entire cosmology is his answer, which raises the next question directly. If the cosmos is built this way, what is the human soul inside it? Julian's answer, still working from that same hymn, is that the soul is rational because it participates in that same divine intellect, running the cosmos, not identical to it, connected to it, genuinely, the way light connects to its source, without being the source. And that gives the philosophical life an actual function, not just a taste for reading, purification, a deliberate, lifelong stripping away of whatever in a person is merely reactive, merely material, so the soul can begin its ascent back toward the intelligible realm it originally came from. This is why Julian takes the philosophical life so seriously. It isn't a lifestyle preference. It's the soul doing the one thing it's actually structured to do. But if the deepest truths sit that high up, that abstract, why did philosophers for centuries keep telling myths instead of just teaching the metaphysics directly? This is the question Julian's contemporary Sallustius takes on directly, and Julian clearly agrees with the answer. Myths aren't primitive stories waiting to be replaced by philosophy. They're a deliberate method, a way of encoding difficult truths so they can reach people who will never sit through a lecture on the demiurge. Read literally. A myth is often strange or violent. Read allegorically. It becomes philosophical language, initiation instead of information. Literal readings, Julian insists, simply miss the point of what a sacred story was built to do. This is exactly how he defends Cybele, the mother of the gods, in one of his strangest surviving texts. Read literally. Her myth is grotesque. Read through Neoplatonic allegory. Cybele represents generation and order themselves. the divine motherhood behind the physical world's capacity to take on form at all. She becomes cosmic mediation in symbolic form, the connecting point between pure intellect above and raw matter below. Why does an emperor spend real energy defending one specific, unfashionable goddess? Because for Julian, Cybele isn't decoration. She's the structural link, explaining how intellect ever reaches down into matter in the first place. From cosmic order, Julian moves to political order and asks a very old Platonic question. Should a ruler pursue power or virtue? His letters return to this constantly. Authority without self-government, he argues, is just force with a crown on it. A ruler has to master his own appetites before he has any legitimate claim over anyone else's. Justice isn't primarily rules imposed from outside. It's an internal order, achieved first in one life, then extended outward into public responsibility. Moral education, in Julian's view, comes before political power, not after it. A philosopher king, in the old Platonic sense, isn't a king who happens to like books. He's a person whose inner discipline has earned the right to organize other people's lives, which leads to a harder question Julian never fully resolves. Can philosophy actually become a religion? His teacher, Iamblichus, thought yes, and introduced theurgy, ritual practice designed to draw divine power directly into the material world, rather than relying purely on contemplation to climb up toward it. Julian took this seriously. He wanted priests who were also philosophers, ritual grounded in genuine moral formation instead of empty spectacle, philosophy as something lived and practiced daily, not confined to texts. But the tension sits right there in his own writing and never fully closes. Is theurgic ritual an extension of contemplation, or a concession to something contemplation was originally meant to outgrow? Now to the argument he's most remembered for. What exactly did Julian criticize in Christianity? Not cruelty, and not superstition in general. His specific target, in Against the Galileans, is what he read as a built-in exclusivism. One people, one revelation, one truth, replacing what he considered universal reason, a rational order any properly trained mind could reach through Greek paideia, the classical education built on Homer, rhetoric, and philosophy. Julian believed this education was the actual mechanism that taught a soul how to reason at all, and he saw a contradiction in Christian teachers using that same education while rejecting the gods and worldview it was built around. His argument, read on its own terms rather than through the hostility of his later reputation, is really a defense of religious pluralism and universal reason against what he saw as a narrowing of both. None of this theory mattered to Julian without character behind it, and that's the subject of much of his private correspondence. Can knowledge exist without virtue? His answer is no. He describes philosophy as ascesis, training, built on the four classical virtues: temperance, courage, justice, and wisdom, held together as a single unified practice rather than separate achievements. Theory and practice were never two different projects for him. A philosopher who couldn't govern his own appetites, in Julian's view, hadn't actually understood the philosophy he claimed to know. Then there's the strangest document in his entire body of work, the Misopogon, a public satire he wrote about himself, mocking his own beard, his own austere lifestyle, his own deep unpopularity, with a city that wanted spectacle and got a philosopher-emperor instead. Why would a ruling emperor publicly ridicule himself? Because satire, in the old Cynic tradition, was itself a form of philosophical criticism. Through the joke, Julian was making a real argument about vanity, luxury, and civic corruption, that a city addicted to comfort had lost its ability to recognize virtue even while that virtue was standing in front of it, in charge. Pull everything together, across every text, and one question remains. What was Julian actually trying to preserve? Not one specific ritual or one particular god, a whole inheritance, running through Plato, through Aristotle, through his teacher Iamblichus, defined by religious pluralism and by the conviction that philosophy itself was the foundation an entire civilization stood on, not an ornament attached to it afterward, which brings the whole system back to its highest point. What is the actual purpose of a human life, in Julian's terms? Homoousis theo, becoming like the divine, reached through contemplation, through intellectual purification, through the soul's long return to the order it originally came from. Happiness, in this framework, isn't pleasure or success. It's virtue completed, the philosophical ideal actually lived out, not just described. Julian died in a Persian desert at 31, and within a few decades the empire moved fully in the other direction. He lost. But the question he raised was never really answered by his defeat. It was only postponed. Can a civilization keep the reasoning it inherited from a philosophy while discarding the metaphysics that reasoning depended on? Or does the foundation eventually go missing, quietly, generations later, in places nobody thinks to check?